walk in the spirit is difficult, dealing with all of the ignorance. But in the Bible, and still talking about the Bible, what is the benefit? Everything about your counterfeit, there ain't no rebuttal you can counter with. On the internet, you the master teacher. In real life, you powerless. Keep it real with you, I don't have time for this. I ride for this, my forefathers died for this. They cry for this opportunity, presently I possess it. Right now, you are the opposite. If you walk in love, you fulfill the law. Don't get involved, you ain't giving it all. If you ever think it's cool to threaten another man's family, then you already lost. Chemtrails got aluminum, heavy metal saturate the atmosphere. Manhattan Project, time travel, Mandela effect, what happened here? GMO food processing to the whole world become obsolete. A black man who believes in Jesus got my own team taking shots at me. You trespassing on property that you don't fully understand properly. All the back and forth, that's not for me, that's for ROC and the War Machine. If we ride together, then we ride together. If we can't do it, I'd rather leave. I still stand on the word of God till the day I die and no longer breathe. We trapped inside the diaspora, nightmares of the massacre. Cold sweat, I'm below deck in the middle passage, just a passenger. Revolutionary hardcore, liberation, that's a hard job. You ain't ready, you a oddball. Keep your mouth closed like lockjaw. I learned trying to bring people together on the same page, make them separate. All the talk about reconciliation, when the time come, you hesitate. If Jesus was able to sit at the table with a bunch of sinners, you very fake. Your steps ordered by the Lord, and how it was yesterday, your big mistake. We the city sitting on the hill. Guess it all depends on how you live. Guess it all depends on how you feel, and we both know that ain't God's will. I stood on what I felt was right. I don't never question if God's real. Trapped inside this matrix, I'm about to pop the red and the blue pill.
Bless them which persecute you. Bless and curse not. Rejoice with them that do rejoice, and weep with them that weep. Be of the same mind one toward another. Mind not high things, but condescend to men of low estate. Be not wise in your own conceits. Recompense to no man evil for evil. Provide things honest in the sight of all men. If it be possible, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men. Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, said the Lord. Therefore, if thine enemy hunger, feed him. If he thirst, give him drink. For in so doing thou shalt heap coals of fire on his head. Be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good. Romans 12:14-21.
Go back to the comment section right here. I know y'all a couple of seconds behind me. We're going to talk about a couple of things, but I said let me get my brother on here right now so we could try to get some clarity with this DNA thing. You want me to play as we're coming in? Maybe you could give a little background, like you were just informing me that this video was around for a minute. But I was really under the impression that, I've had a few people on here, yourself, G-Con, talking about this DNA, and I was really under the impression that E1B1A marker, I believe it is, I was really under the impression that was connected with Israel. And that's not the case.
Say it again?
I was under the impression that E1B1A marker was connected to slavery, and therefore people connecting themselves to Israel, and they were a lot of people are going to the Jed match and everything in order to kind of validate that they weren't descendant of Africans as many have claimed.
Well, no, what I would say is E1B1A specifically is very much a dominant haplogroup in West Africa, and unsurprisingly, it's also the majority haplogroup amongst the West African diaspora in the Americas. Okay. Whether or not it's connected to Jacob is where, things are a lot less clear. I mean, I would certainly say it's possible, but I don't think the evidence is tremendously in its favor. I think there's a decent case for a very closely related haplogroup, which is E1B1B. But nonetheless, yes, amongst a lot of Israelites, not all Israelites, again, the Israelite spectrum is very diverse, but there have been a number of Israelites who've taken the position that E1B1A is the Israelite marker, right? That if you have that marker, you descend from Jacob. So this video came up recently because myself and others were contrasting it with a video that I had recently commented on by Yashub of Genesis 49ers. And so this video, which is a year old, resurfaced. And so what the background to this video is, the gentlemen, the twins over at the End of the World Ministries, Yakoba and Tayu, they reject appeals to haplogroups in general. They sense that it poses a number of problems, and so therefore they reject it, and they reject the idea of E1B1A being the Israelite haplogroup. Now, full disclosure, I'm not saying this necessarily entails bias, but a number of people find it worthy of note that they themselves took a DNA test and found that they did not have E1B1A, rather they had haplogroup G, and therefore some have wondered if that motivates their hostility to E1B1A or to haplogroups in general. But anyway, this clip is them attempting to present an argument against trying to demonstrate who's an Israelite based on whether or not they have E1B1A.
Okay, fair use. Yeah, let me get this volume up.
Sub-Saharan, but yet his haplogroup.
Okay.
So, Minister Tayu, according to this particular guy, he lives his life as a white guy. His I'm assuming autosomal numbers are 97.5% European composition, 2.3% sub-Saharan, but yet his haplogroup is E1B1A. Now, according to Ron Dalton and the line that is a coward, isn't E1B1A supposed to be Israel? Well, what they're going to say is, well, you know, he had black in his family. As you see, they're free colored persons. Yes, they are. But if he's 97.5%, that's more than most of us. If you go test your DNA being African, he's 97.5% European, makes him European. So therefore, according to Ron Dalton and according to the line that is a coward, this guy would have to be an Israelite. Minister Tayu.
Now, let me know if I break up. But that shows you the faulty reasoning that they have, which is what we've been trying to show you guys for quite some time now.
You're breaking up.
Okay, well, hopefully it'll adjust, right? But we've been trying to show you guys this problem that they have with this logic about how they use E1B1A. Basically, they're saying anyone with E1B1A is Israel. So by their logic, this 97.5% European is Israel. Now, if you look at it, if you put that in jet match, you're going to see nothing but European, almost 90, you'll see 97.5% Europeans popping up as his match. Pop, 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 right? 97.5% Europeans will be coming up on his result set. Okay? 2.5% will come up as African. But yet they're going to say he Israel because E1B1A is the Israelites. That does not work.
Okay, you want me to comment on that, or you want to say something?
Yeah, please. Yeah, hold on a second. Yes, please do. I'm trying to write some stuff down here as
No
you're sharing this. Go ahead.
So what's at issue here is not everybody has the same definition of Israelite, but it seems to me that most Israelites hold to a patrilineal definition of Israelite, which means that an Israelite is defined as someone whose father's line, their father's line, irrespective of their mother's line, their father's line goes back to Jacob. That's how most Israelites seem to define Israelite today. They were arguing that you have a person who has E1B1A, and it seems to imply that, again, the guy is an American, so he probably does descend from African Americans, but he's quote unquote white because the vast majority of his DNA is European. So the way to imagine this is imagine if an African American gentleman had a son with a quote unquote white woman, and then that son had a son with with another quote unquote white woman. 3-4 generations of that, you get a guy who his outward appearance is one way, but his father's line goes back to someone who may have looked different from him. And so their argument was that it's ridiculous to think this guy is an Israelite because of his autosomal DNA, because of these other figures, these other parts of his DNA separate from his paternal line is what the implication is, And so they never really, since that came out, I've tried to get them to clarify their precise position on their definition of Israelite. Like, for example, I think one of the two central questions, and they're very similar questions, but they are different. The first question I would have is, do they believe that a person who does not descend paternally from Jacob can be an Israelite? And then the second question, which is very closely related, do they believe that a person who does descend from Jacob paternally can be a non-Israelite?
Do me a favor. Look at, you can see the screen.
I'm sorry, say it again.
Can you see the screen?
Yeah, it says Dante, I believe, is E1B1B. Yes, and
what did you say about Albert Einstein and those markers a few months back?
Yeah, so yeah, Dante is definitely E1B1B. I have a couple of videos on that. Dante shared my most recent video on that. He's E1B1B. What's significant about E1B1B is it's among the markers found in the oldest genetic samples from Palestine, what they now call Israel. So the oldest samples in Palestine for which they could propose a paternal haplogroup, a number of them had E1B1B, and the ones that didn't had upstream, ancestors of E1B1B, and so forth. Therefore, that was significant because while I don't claim that Dante necessarily descends from the Natufians, from that ancient population that lived in Palestine, it's at least possible. And not only that, because E1B1B is a very ancient marker for the Levant, it's also possible. There's a distinct possibility that was Jacob's haplogroup. So, I've long said that raises Dante might have a better chance than a lot of other people. I think he has a decent chance of being a descendant of Jacob. I can't say for certain that he is, but I think, so that's that. But Yakoba and Tayu were discussing something else. They were sort of rejecting the whole appeal to haplogroups, and the discussion was on E1B1A, not E1B1B. But nonetheless, their approach was to imply that if someone has a particular paternal marker, but the rest of their DNA is predominantly European, then they can't be an Israelite. And that really begs the question of how one defines Israelite, because obviously they're using a different definition from a lot of other Israelites.
What, in your opinion, just this whole thing that you've been hearing? I'm with my people. I'm with some other folk right now when we start dealing with prophecies, and we're going to talk about that. And yesterday, the conference of the pastors and everything. But I wanted Abu to come on here first. What's your opinion with this thing from because you've been closely following this? What's your opinion with this whole thing with the DNA and attempting to identify yourself as Israel? What's your whole opinion from what you've been hearing? Is it all nonsense in your opinion, in your humble opinion?
It's definitely,
or it can go somewhere.
It's definitely not nonsense. I don't know where it's going to go in the end, because ultimately, now who knows? Maybe we're getting closer to figuring out who descends from Jacob and who doesn't, but I think we're still very much, looking through a glass darkly on this. There's a lot we don't know. There's a lot of open questions. We don't know Jacob's haplogroup. We can only talk in terms of probabilities. We can say, there's a decent chance that Jacob was E1B1B or something like that. But I think ultimately we are, as I said, still in the dark on this question. And I think that takes us back to the whole thing about, endless genealogy. So for me, this is ultimately just an interesting intellectual exercise, but I think ultimately it doesn't matter vis-a-vis the Christian faith, but it is an interesting intellectual exercise.
I'm sorry, I'm talking and you see the screen. Read the screen.
He said they are not ascribing skin color to being Israelite, the same as Genesis 49ers. Well, they later clarified that that's not what they're doing, but what they're saying, though, nonetheless, they come very close to insinuating that it's possible to be a person who descends from Jacob and yet is not an Israelite. And so in that sense, Yakoba's approach, which rejects recourse to haplogroups, is very different from Yashub's approach. They mentioned Genesis 49ers. That's Yashub. Yashub's approach focuses very much on paternal haplogroups, while Yakoba and Tayu reject an appeal to paternal haplogroups and instead appeal to autosomal DNA, which I think is a much less precise approach. It has more problems as far as I can see, because you could have a person who doesn't descend from a particular population patrilineally, like his father's line could come from a different population, yet the rest of his DNA could be indicative of that population. Like if you let's say if you had a son and you left him in China and he married a Chinese woman, and then their son married a Chinese woman, within 7 generations of that, you'd have a kid who's like 99% Chinese, yet he would descend from you. You know what I mean? So like autosomal DNA does not, really tell the story of patrilineal descent. And so I do think that's actually why that video resurfaced, because it was coming up in discussions which were contrasting Yashub's approach with the approach of Tayu Ministries, in part because I had recently commented on Facebook about an interesting video by Yashub from last summer titled Black Jews and White Jews Are Related. It's a very interesting video. I covered it in my both on Facebook and in my YouTube community tab, and I recommend it. It's a quite good video.
And that's the problem. That's the only reason that I was looking into the DNA thing, because people were bringing it up. You know, they were discussing it, but then I think that brother, he jumped on here, and when he started sharing some stuff, he gave the impression, is there a connection with people over here and the people that live in Palestine right now? That's what I'm going to ask you instead of putting it. Is there a connection? Because there's a lot of people in the community say those people are fake. And I'm showing y'all why I'm saying what I'm saying now and how we're going to get into prophecy. And this is all, trust me, y'all, this is all setting it up for when we bring the pastors on and we have part 2 of what went on yesterday. Is there a connection? Because we're hearing a lot of fake, they fake, and then other brothers come around and other brothers say stuff connecting some of those people over there with not being fake, but being maybe Jews, Israel, whatever term these people want to use. You can't even offend nobody. What's the connection, if there's any?
Well, this is what I would say. First off, both populations that are being compared, I guess the comparison you're talking about is one that compares the African diaspora in the Americas with, let's say, Ashkenazi Jews or mainstream Jews in general. What I would say is both populations are diverse patrilineally. In terms of their paternal lines, they're far more diverse than some of the how can I put this? Some Israelites let on, or some Israelites realize. So, especially the Ashkenazi community. The Ashkenazi community is so diverse that no haplogroup has a majority amongst them. And so it is true that in terms of paternal lines, there is some overlap between African Americans and Ashkenazi Jews. You know, that the fact that E1B1A is dominant amongst African Americans, and that's sort of like a sister haplogroup. It's sort of runs parallel with E1B1B, which is found amongst roughly 15% of Ashkenazim. And as Yashub has brought out, there even are some Ashkenazim who have E1B1A. They're an extreme minority within the Ashkenazi population, but they exist. And conversely, with Dante as an example, there are African Americans who have E1B1B. And so there has to be obviously some Ashkenazim and some African Americans are more closely related to each other than they are to others in these respective groupings that we put them in. With these groupings based on morphology, language, religion, ideology, that kind of stuff, geography. But in terms of paternal lines, some Ashkenazi Jews and some African Americans are more closely related to each other than they are to others in those respective groups. And the example I would give is, like, for example, haplogroup R. You see, someone mentioned haplogroup R on the screen. There are Ashkenazi Jews who have haplogroup R. There might be as much as 10%, maybe 15% of African Americans have haplogroup R. So
wait a minute, because Abu, I'm slow with this DNA thing's not me. But like I said, I'm lining this up for that prophecy. But so you're telling me there's some people that could be out here banging, talking about who's fake over there, and they're more connected with them than some of their dark-skinned next-door neighbors.
Yeah. I'll give you one. Actually, let's use haplogroup G as an example, because haplogroup G is found among some Ashkenazim, something like 7% of them maybe. That's found in roughly the same region where the Khazar Empire was, right? So I don't know what haplogroups the Khazars had, but if we were looking for a Khazar haplogroup, right, we would say G is probably a good candidate. So Ashkenazim that have haplogroup G, there's a good chance they're direct descendants of the Khazars, right? But here's a catch now. So let's compare. Now, as we know, there's a couple of Israelites out there who are African Americans who have haplogroup G as well. What I would say is that irrespective of whether you're an African American or an Ashkenazi Jew, or let's say you're living in Italy, or I remember Orthodox Moor gave the analogy, if you're living in Mongolia, he said, if your haplogroup is E1B1B, I think you have a much better chance of descending from Jacob than someone who has haplogroup G. And that applies no matter what you are. So what I would say is, for example, Dante Fortson has a better chance of descending from Jacob than, say, some Ashkenazi who's haplogroup G. But if we're fair, we can flip that and say an Ashkenazi who has E1B1B has a better chance than, say, certain African Americans who have haplogroup G. It goes both ways, you know? So it's not about like morphology, it's about the likelihood of these haplogroups going back to Jacob.
Well, how do you're because you're a Bible believer, how do you connect that with prophecy? You see somebody say, isn't nobody is supposed to be in the land, and the claim that people that descended from Israel, there were some people that never left Babylon, there were some people that were there that never left whatsoever. How do you connect what you know with DNA with this Bible in your mind?
Well, the first thing I would say is I think a lot of these prophecies, I think I was looking in the chat and I saw George had said that, you know, a lot of these attempts to interpret prophecies are subjective, George's Ruah. And I think that's a great point. There's what I would say about these prophecies is, you know, people try to make that the end all be all, but even before getting into genetics, like, for example, let's talk about Deuteronomy 28, right? You'll say, well, look, there's a number of things in Deuteronomy 28 that are applied to Israelites, and now we can point to other people who had similar experiences, and then they leap to this conclusion, therefore those other people who had these experiences are also Israelites. But the thing is, the reasoning is problematic, and the easy response to that is there's nothing precluding non-Israelites from also having those sorts of experiences. So therefore, trying to connect the experiences doesn't demonstrate that a person's an Israelite. Now, that you could say that even before the genetics came into it. Now what we know is people who are attempting to apply the prophecies to different groups, they're lumping in lots of different haplogroups, and they're creating situations where, while some of the people that they're calling Israelites might descend from Jacob, they can't possibly all descend from Jacob. And that's the thing. And I think the genetics starts to show the problem with these attempts to, you know, to appeal to prophecy, you know, because you know, sometimes people are misunderstanding things. Yes, a sound mindset, prophecy is vague and can be misinterpreted. Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with that comment on the screen.
I'm sorry, but he's saying DNA is not. So he's saying that that's a better argument in intellectuality. But when we start dealing with this stuff is sounding crazy. It's sounding like folk out here talking crazy about this DNA, and they just really don't know. I'm a Bible man. I would rather stick with the Bible, even if, and I understand that they're saying prophecies are vague, but I'm telling you right now, this DNA could be more confusing. But he's saying DNA is not.
Well,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, what I would say is maybe it's not the issue isn't necessarily with prophecy, it's with our own fallibility. I think it's clear that human history, Christian history, or the history of, you know, professed believers in the Bible is filled with people interpreting prophecies and getting those interpretations wrong. The most glaring examples are people who are trying to predict when, you know, when Christ comes back.
Revelation and all that, yeah, definitely. Yes.
But I think that applies here as well. You know, that of course the Bible is infallible, but human interpretations of the Bible are not. And I think while of course genetics also has to be interpreted to a certain degree, you know, that we also have to interpret the genetic, you know, and we have to engage in a little bit of speculation, you know, because it's not like we have Jacob's body or something like that. But
yeah, that was somebody just asked.
But nonetheless, so there's speculation there as well. But the point is that I think it does shed some light. So this is the way I would put it. We cannot say definitively who is an Israelite, but at the very least, what the genetics have done is they've allowed us to look at groups and at least say, well, it's impossible for everyone in that particular group to be an Israelite. Now, I would say that about both Ashkenazi Jews and, for example, the One West Tribes chart, right? With Ashkenazi Jews, there's far too many haplogroups amongst Ashkenazi Jews to say that they're all descended patrilineally from Jacob. I would say the majority of them aren't. We don't know who specifically does descend from Jacob, but we can say confidently that the majority of Ashkenazi Jews do not descend patrilineally from Jacob. Similarly, there's so many haplogroups amongst the people that are grouped together on the One West Tribes chart. We could also say that it's impossible that all those people descend from Jacob, and we should probably say confidently that there's literally hundreds of millions of people included on the tribes chart who do not descend from Jacob.
Period.
Seriously.
What do you say about the screen? Look at the screen.
Ashkenazi blood ain't in those old bones. Well, this is what I would say. Some of these like sort of ethnic categorizations, like Ashkenazi, people, you know, our haplogroups are older than whatever ethnic group we're currently a part of, right? And that's another thing to keep in mind about like morphology and language and culture. You know, it's clear that Ashkenazi Jews come from a diverse spectrum, which predates the existence of Ashkenazi Jews, and some of them, you know, some of them are very similar. Let's put it this way: some of them paternally are close to the Natufian samples. Like the same thing that I said about Dante, I would also say about some Ashkenazi Jews. Perhaps 10 to 15% of them, they have a haplogroup implying that they're closely related patrilineally to the Natufians, for example, and to, you know, presumably various, you know, Asian Semites as well. And here I mean, you know, linguistic Semites. I don't know Shem's haplogroup, so I can't say for certain who's a patrilineal Semite. I know there are people who take the position, Yashub takes the position that, you know, anyone with haplogroup D or E is a Semite. I don't know if that's the case, but nonetheless, I think it's the paternal lines of all Ashkenazi Jews predate the idea of Ashkenazi Jews. You know,
it's everyone at Mount Sinai, were they related?
This is a great question. I think there's a lot of people who want to
just throw away the whole DNA thing straight in the garbage.
Well, this is what I would say. It's a great question. I think a lot of people would want to answer that question yes and say, oh, they were all descendants of Jacob. I suspect that, you know, the whole thing with the mixed multitude, but just in general, I think, you know, even after the law came, the Israelites were accepting converts, but I imagine that they may have been, before the law was given to them at Sinai, they may have been even more loose with their level of acceptance of different people who wanted to live amongst them and live their way of life. So it seems to me at least possible that, you know, there were people who didn't descend from Jacob who were, you know, considered Israelites at the time, you know.
Even though some people try to clean it up and say that the mixed multitude died out in the wilderness before the few believings went in, you know, when they had spent a generation in the wilderness. Or
they say, yeah, they were removed later. That's a popular objection. Whatever the case, I imagine. Here's what I'll say: when we look at the Semites from the Bronze Age onwards, they seem to be diverse every step of the way. And by this, again, I mean linguistic Semites. I'm not claiming everyone within that group descends from Shem. That's impossible. But amongst linguistic Semites, they're diverse today, and they seem to have been diverse all the way back to the Bronze Age, you know?
Diverse. All right. So automatically, from your understanding, that's all it is. We're asking from your understanding, anybody that's preaching, because this is connected away in the anybody that's preaching who fit the prophecies and try to say everybody that got off them slave ships fit the prophecies, DNA's arguing against them then. Or like somebody said,
yeah, I do think the DNA flies in the face of a lot of these attempts to interpret the prophecies. I think the two glaring examples are, first, One West with their tribes chart. Like, a lot of the tribes chart is based on interpretations of prophecy, interpretations of biblical texts like Genesis 49. And I think the DNA evidence is at odds with that, you know, with the claims of the One West tribes chart. And that's why some proponents of the tribes chart go out of their way to say, well, you know, DNA and specifically appeal to haplogroups is, you know, quote unquote junk science. And okay, that's their position. And then the other example I would give, and, you know, some of the people who are into Yashub have pointed this out, and I think I'm pretty sure Yashub has pointed this out as well. So that would also apply to the idea that anyone who was on a slave ship or anyone who was in slavery was therefore an Israelite. You know, I think common sense would have told us that doesn't really follow, but now the genetic evidence also flies against it. You know, that it's impossible for all African Americans, all descendants of the victims of the transatlantic slave trade, to descend from Jacob. That's patrilineally. I mean, it's impossible for all of them to descend from Jacob. Maybe some of them do. How many, I don't know, but it can't be all of them. You know, at least that's what the genetic evidence implies.
Slick, what's hold on a boo? Slick, come on.
Hey, I ain't here for the DNA. I'm here for the prophecy.
Okay, all right. He said, all right. Hold on a second.
I'm trying to get in early. That's all.
Okay, all right. I got you. I'm sorry. Go. All right. So, anything else?
No, unless there's anything you want to ask, I think that sums it up. I mean, I got to go soon, but if there's anything else.
All right. Anybody got any questions for Abu before we move on from this and we start dealing with some other stuff? I want to bring out some other things. Like I said, this is lining up for when the pastors and them come back on. I know y'all are 18 seconds behind us. Do y'all have any questions right now on this subject before we move on, dealing with Abu, dealing with this DNA and how different groups of people are using it? This is important, and how different groups of people are using it. Put the question in there and I'll click and I'll put it up on the screen. I'm gonna give y'all another 10-15 seconds to see what's what, and then we're gonna move on. All right, no, what they said, no, Boo don't fit. He said, you don't fit the, all right, somebody saying, all right, you don't fit the prophecy. You look at scripture. I mean, look at things, I'm sorry, but you look at
Bible's infallible, and the canon of the Bible I hold to, forgive me if my Protestant friends are upset about this. I believe in basically the same canon of scripture that, one Westerners generally affirm. I also affirm the deuterocanonical text, which are commonly called apocrypha in Protestant circles, So yeah, no, I definitely believe the scriptures.
All right. Look at what do you say to this?
I mean, I have no idea. He says, I believe the Bantu people are biblical Israelites, descendants of the transatlantic slave trade. I don't know. I mean, obviously I can't say who is or is not an Israelite because I don't have Jacob's DNA. So maybe. And I haven't looked at I don't know what the full spectrum of Bantu DNA looks like. I don't know if there's just one haplogroup amongst them. I know E1B1A is dominant, but I don't know if that's the only one or if they themselves are diverse, similar to, African Americans. So I don't know. I can't speak on that. Who do I think are the Israelites? This is going to be controversial. First off, in terms of patrilineal Israelites, I would take Deuteronomy 28:64 as possibly referring to descendants, and therefore I would take it for granted that Israelites are literally scattered all over the world, and therefore you can't point to any single group and say, this group in its entirety are Israelites. I think what it probably is that any group you look at, you're going to find descendants of Jacob amongst them. So that could be, yes, African Americans, but also Ashkenazim, Koreans, and so on down the line, Italians, whatever, Yeah. But ultimately, I don't hold to a patrilineal definition of Israelite. As I've discussed in previous times on the show, I hold to a ecclesiastical definition of Israelite. I do believe that in the New Testament, ultimately, the church is Israel. Now, I know people don't like that, and that's fine if you reject it, but I'm saying that's ultimately my view. But here, we're just discussing genetics. We're discussing the idea of a patrilineal Israelite. Who do we think descends patrilineally from Jacob? Whether or not, See, he says, can you show from the Bible that Ashkenaz descends from Jacob? So this is a thing where people will look up the word Ashkenaz in Genesis and show that it descends from Japhet, and they think therefore anyone hey. The problem with that is that the people who take this approach, they seem to understand well that you could have a people called Israel today. There's a country in the Middle East called Israel today. It has something like 6 million people in it. People can understand that the people are called Israel, yet they don't descend from the biblical Israel. Many of them don't. And so too, I think a lot of the same people understand that you have a population in North Africa right now called Egypt, but those people aren't necessarily descendants of the biblical Egyptians. By the same token, that one should understand a modern group called Ashkenaz doesn't necessarily entail that everyone in that group descends from the biblical Ashkenaz. And that's the whole point. The way Ashkenaz is used now, it's mostly a geographical and linguistic designation. It's that part of mainstream Jewry that sort of used, Yiddish, used more of a Germanic tongue and was, part of the Eastern European Jewry, and then ultimately, a lot of European Jewry, except for what the Sephardic had in the southern part of the Iberian Peninsula. But it's ultimately a linguistic, to some extent now. Ashkenaz is almost it's also refers to the sort of rite that exists within Judaism, the style, the modes of approach, of interpretation and stuff like that. But it's not, Ashkenaz is not a lineage designation.
All right, hold on a minute. Let me slip one last question before you get out of here, Boo. Slick, come on, you said you wanted one question on this DNA thing?
Oh no, I ain't want no questions on this, brother Berean. Like I said, I do. I did put one in the private chat. I'm sorry. Let me ask you, Boo. Boo, you saying that whoever they is, they got scattered to the four corners of the earth, right?
Correct.
So that would you say they still in their captivity and they have to be gathered at the end time prophecy?
I mean, I don't know. I guess. You see, here's the thing. Captivity is a very term.
Let him go, Slick. Let him
it's very
okay.
Discussing captivity. See people applying captivity to people who are even, who are very wealthy. People who are amongst the, some of the very high living standards, and they're described as in captivity. So what I would say is I don't know what captivity means if it's going to be that expansive. So that's why I don't really discuss the subject of who's in captivity and who's not.
I mean, Jeremiah 30, Deuteronomy 30, Joel 3, all says that these people will be gathered from the land of their captivity. So the question I'm asking you, besides African Americans, what other group of people been scattered all around the world as slaves?
Again, well, obviously, what I would say is Israelites are the ones who've been scattered. Oh, look at this. I'm guessing this is either Yakoba or Tayu there.
Yes,
you might have something to say because this is relevant to what we were discussing. Again, I can't say who is a captive and who isn't if we're applying captivity, that word, to people who are extremely wealthy, who can basically go anywhere in the world, so I don't even know what that means,
Okay, hold on a minute.
I might want to say something before I go.
All right, yeah, hold on. I'm mute everybody else. Grace and peace. Come to the microphone, brother.
What's up, brother Berean? How you doing,
what's good with you? How's everything? You got the floor. What are you
Good
doing?
evening. Good evening. Good to
All right, let's deal with this issue here. Okay. All right. Our position is that haplogroup is faulty, period. Okay. Perfect example. Yeah, period. Now, they get all hyped up in this thing, but when you look at the data and you look at autosomal, it don't line up. Basically, for all of this stuff that they're speaking, for haplogroup to make any sense, it needs to be reaffirmed and confirmed by autosomal. Now, Berean, you can't go to prison for not paying child support based on haplogroup. All right, period. You can't do it. But you can go to prison for not paying child support if you match autosomally. So why would autosomal not be the method for verifying who your forefather is? Also, when they deal with E1B1A, okay, and they say Jacob was E1B1A, do you not know Esau is E1B1A along with his brother Jacob? That's another problem.
Same mother.
Yes, you are what your father is according to haplogroup. So you can't escape that. If Jacob is E1B1A, then if Isaac is E1B1A, Jacob is E1B1A, Esau is E1B1A. The 12 tribes are E1B1A. But here's another problem you got. The other problem is you do not know at what point the mutation takes place, right? Mutations actually occur a lot more frequent than was promoted by the industry, okay? It happens a lot more. So you have 12 sons. All of those sons maintain that E1B1A. See, this is what they don't understand. There can be a mutation in one of those sons. And this is how you get through that. So you can't, this is my point. There's flaws in the whole haplogroup argument just by this logic. I mean, some of these E1B1A might be Esau. Now,
I actually agree with that last part. Yeah, definitely. So this is what I'll say. First, regarding the paternity test, let's say this. Having the same haplogroup as someone does not prove that they're your father. So yes, a haplogroup test, would not settle it. How, you do autosomal for, a paternal test for your literal father. However, what I would say is if, let's say, hypothetically speaking, your haplogroup R and the guy that's being claimed that maybe your father is haplogroup D, you could say pretty confidently that that's not your father. But yes, if you have the same haplogroup, that doesn't prove that it's a father-son relationship. Of course, you have to go beyond that for something that close, father-son relationship. As for the rest of it, I absolutely agree that even if we did have Jacob's haplogroup, that wouldn't prove that everyone with that haplogroup therefore descends from Jacob. I myself have said that quite a bit.
It starts to fall apart.
Well, I don't think but I think it does bring us closer, at least if we settled on a particular haplogroup, we can. Here's the thing. If we knew what Jacob's haplogroup was, we couldn't necessarily prove who does descend from Jacob, but we could definitely say who didn't. So
it would help.
But Mr. Tate, you're saying it can't really be trusted like we think it could be like some people are arguing it could be trusted.
Well, I don't think
here's
it's
the thing,
Hold on, but let me hear what you said.
Abu or me?
No, you.
Okay. Here's the thing, right? When you do look, a haplogroup is a mutation on the Y chromosome, one single chromosome. Now, autosomal, you're dealing with the 22 pairs, 22 chromosomal pairs versus one. And the only thing you have on that Y chromosome is one mutation. This is why if you go read the scientific documents, sometimes these scientists have to guess. They have to guess on what haplogroup to place you in. See, they don't read enough of this stuff. Go some of these documents, the scientists have to look at your results and decide, oh, I'm gonna place you in this group based on your results. Okay, it's a weak position. Now, we were on your show a few years ago, Berean. We showed you the haplogroups, the autosomal matches, and here's the underlying thing, right? The underlying thing is autosomal is 22 chromosomal pairs. It is the ideal way to match who your father is. It is the very thing that can send you to court or send you to prison, right, for committing a crime. So, to argue against autosomal as not being the main way to do it, it has to be. All right. This is the very thing that convicts you. All right. So when we shared,
agree with that.
When we shared our autosomal results, now this is where you start seeing interesting things. You start to see matches in the primarily Nigeria, Ghana, Benin, right? In every single Negro who went to GEDmatch. And then if you run MLDLP, every single one of us will show up as Limba. Almost 99% of us. I mean, there's a few that really don't match, but the ones I've seen, they are not descendants of slaves. They came here later. But all the ones that are ADOS are descendants of slaves match back to the Limba in the autosomal comparison. That's hardcore evidence when out of all of these slaves, descendants of slaves in America, and even in UK and Europe, out of all of these Negro people, their breakdown by 23andMe, by Ancestry, break down the same. I mean, percentage-wise, it may be a little more one than the other, but it's the same breakdown. I mean, is Nigeria, is Ghana, is Benin, Togo, right? When you're dealing 23andMe and Ancestry, what's the odds of that? If we're not the same people, we're matching autosomally, which is 22 chromosomes. So we obviously have similar forefathers in the past, whereas our DNA does not match the Ashkenaz. Now, there's a scientist who is a scholarly genetic researcher, Aaron Elhake. He did research. He's a Jew. He did research on his people. He said they do not come out of the Levant. They come out of Turkey, in the area of Turkey. This is an Ashkenazi Jew doing research on his own people.
All right, Abu. Somebody said, hold on. Somebody said Limba has 3 different haplogroups.
Yeah, that was Yahoo who brought that up. And that's a great point.
You agree with that, Minister?
That's an excellent point.
Once again, I'm telling you, that's the faultiness of haplogroup, period. It's autosomal that tells you who your forefather is.
Wait,
all right, come on. All right.
When it comes to autosomal DNA, like he talks about court cases and paternity tests, that has to do with like something that's very close, like your DNA vis-a-vis, like say a bodily fluid that they might have found at a crime scene, or like a parent-child relationship. It becomes very different using autosomal DNA on a span of millennia. Now, let me give an example. This is an example I've given before. Suppose you have a son, right? And you drop him off, or your son moves to a population that we believe is non-Israelite, right? Let's, hypothetically speaking, let's just say Han Chinese. Let's assume, just for the sake of argument, that Han Chinese are not Israelites, right? If your son, it has a son with a wife who's Han Chinese, that son might be 50% Han Chinese. If that son goes on to do the same thing, have a son with another Han Chinese woman, that child might be 75% Han Chinese. So you could have a situation where after 7 generations, the child, the descendant, is 99% indicative of the population that it's lived in for 7 generations, and yet its paternal line does not come from that population. So when you start talking about long time scales, autosomal DNA does not reveal your paternal line.
Sure it does, because we have proof in our GEDmatch results. We have evidence that shows we're tied to the Ethiopians, but it's in the distant past. It even shows that we're tied to the Sephardic Jews in the distant past. So it does match. It's just that the percentage of the match decreases over time.
No.
Right. No, look, what you mean? No, I can look. You can go, hold on. Let's get your DNA, Berean. Let's run it through GEDmatch and let's see what the results are. You're going to line up with Ethiopian Jews, Sephardic Jews, and what's the other one? There's a couple of more. We all do. Every last one of us,
including me. I also got an Ethiopian Jewish.
But I'm not saying. I mean, do you? Okay, then maybe you do have some tie to the Israelites. That's my point.
There's another problem here. When you're saying GEDmatch, you mean specifically GEDmatch Oracle, where you use a GEDmatch calculator and then beyond that you click the Oracle results. Correct.
So because it breaks down your historical line.
It says that it doesn't necessarily show descent. Oracle is not necessarily showing descent. It's just showing similarities that you might have. Your genetic makeup might have some similarity with the population.
Okay.
And so, for example, like I don't have any, let me say that, like, for example, when I use the GEDmatch calculators, I don't get Italian, right? I'm not Italian. None of my DNA results came up Italian, right? I don't have any Italian ancestry, right? So when I'm using GEDmatch, I don't get Italian. But when I start going into Oracle, I do start getting Italian. Now, why? The way it does, the distance, when it talks about distance, that's talking about probability. It's talking about distances and similarities, not distances in terms of chronology. The reason why on certain calculators in Oracle I get Italian is because part of my DNA is North African and part of it is European. And unsurprisingly, they probably have Italian samples that are likewise partially North African and partially European. And so that's why I get Italian in Oracle, not because I descend from Italian.
Look, your very statement.
What's similar?
Hold on,
what are you saying? What's wrong with this statement? You said
your very statement is proving that there's some kind of chromosomal genetic match throughout time. Just like you said, okay, you know, maybe it didn't show up in 23andMe as Italian. But when you went to the breakdown, what was happening was it's looking at these populations and looking for a match. So basically, I don't come up with Chinese. Why? Because my chromosomes don't match. So the distance does make a difference. It's just that the distance is saying, okay, I can't guarantee, Abu, that you are lining up with an Italian. But look, your chromosomal makeup is lining up. I found a match. Now, maybe the number of chromosomes or alleles don't line up 100%, but I found something similar. Okay, whereas Abu, did you see any Chinese or Japanese in your GEDmatch results?
That's funny. And again, we need to be very careful what we're saying here. We need to distinguish between GEDmatch Simpliciter, GEDmatch, the first layer of GEDmatch, and then Oracle, which is the second layer of when people are using GEDmatch. Now, funnily enough, I have Filipino DNA. Some of these calculators threw that into Thai. Some of them threw it into Chinese. Some threw it into Cambodian, certain calculators, right? But the thing is, but the point is, though, is that it's not that I don't even get Italian in the first layer of GEDmatch. I only get it in Oracle. And when you
Oracle is deeper.
GEDmatch's own wiki, it says that just because you get something in Oracle, that doesn't necessarily mean you descend from that population. Okay. It just means there's some sort of a similarity, but you don't necessarily descend from those people. And there's a second point to be brought up here. This takes us back to a question that I've brought up many times, which is about the definition of Israelite. Because as I said earlier, if you put a person who does not descend from a population into that population, and he has a son and his son has a son and their son has a son, you could have a situation where their son is 99% of their autosomal DNA is indicative of that population, and yet they don't descend paternally from that population. So this takes us back to definitions, saying I bear some resemblance. Like I got Ethiopian Jews, I got Moroccan Jews. It's not surprising, you know, my father's line comes out of Morocco. But the thing is,
right, you should. If your father line comes out of Morocco, you should be having some Israelite DNA in you.
You should. It's the catch. There's a problem, though. There's a problem here. Let's suppose, hypothetically speaking, if we're just talking about all our lines of descent, then anyone might have, you know, an Israelite somewhere there, and there are millions of ancestors. But what we're talking about is, and I'm under the impression that Tayu, you define Israelite patrilineally. I believe you told me that on Facebook. You still hold to the paternal line. So that does. Here's a question that I've asked.
No, I didn't. I did not say that.
Okay.
I do say the biblical standard goes by paternal line. Okay. But here's the thing. Israel was prophesied to go into captivity worldwide into all nations in the hands of their enemy. What do you think gonna happen to the DNA at that point? Well, all right, but the Most High said he still was going to come back for his people. This is why we say we go by the curses. The scripture says that these curses shall be a sign upon thy people forever. This is how you identify them.
That's above DNA in your book, correct?
What's that, Berean?
I said the curses, the Bible prophecies above DNA, way above DNA.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I believe the Most High.
Well, again, we discussed this earlier. Definitely the Bible, God's word is above, any understanding of man. But let's not confuse the Bible with man's fallible interpretation of the Bible. That's the point. Sometimes we can use this DNA to check some of the attempts to apply interpretations of these philosophies. These prophecies, excuse me. But this is what I was going to say. This takes us back to the thing of definition. Just to be clear, because this is a question I've asked you on Facebook, and I never got a clear answer. I have two questions. The first one is, do you believe it's possible for someone who does not descend from Jacob paternally, from Jacob to be an Israelite?
I know you've been asking Yashub that question, right? And he hasn't answered you because we go by the curses. But I'll answer you. I believe due to the scattering and the captivity, the Most High knew that his people would have some mixture of DNA. So, of course, you can identify, and this is why I go with autosomal. Autosomal, you can still identify those Israelites who have been diluted, let's say for a better term. You can still identify them.
How?
You through autosomal, 22 chromosomal matches.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Yeah. So this is why the curses is the key. But this is the example I'm trying to show you. You can go on YouTube now in the Negroes who have put their DNA into Get Match under MDLP. We all have similar results. That's because we're all related. I'm telling you, let's get Berean. If you have your DNA, let's put it in Get Match, run MDLP and Oracle, and let's just see the breakdown. It's going to be very similar to mine, very similar to Sister E and Dr. Kelly. Look, I've had a lot of our listeners, they sent me their Jet Match. They didn't know how to look at it. I helped them look at it. I ran it. It looks like ours. It looks like mine. Okay. So I'm just telling you, this is the simple way to identify that at least the descendants of the transatlantic slave trade are all related some way.
So you believe a good number of those people that came over here were Israel then?
That's what the scripture said, doesn't it? And the DNA matches, the autosomal results prove that. It's not a one-off. It's not some. The scripture said Israel would be scattered unto all nations and serve other gods. That's us.
So,
all right.
Just to be clear, though, regarding the question, do you believe it's possible for a person that does not descend paternally from Jacob to be an Israelite? Your answer is yes, right?
My answer is yes, because they were going to be abused, raped, betrayed by their enslaver.
That brings me to a second question. Do you believe it's possible for a person who does descend paternally from Jacob to be a non-Israelite?
No, they have to be a descendant of Jacob. If we could prove who Jacob was and they matched Jacob, then they're his descendant too.
All right, so that
this is why I'm saying haplogroup is faulty. We are wasting our time on this haplogroup stuff because, look, if you go read the papers, they would clearly say they hypothesize. They will say they believe. They say the terms.
Educated guesses.
They are guessing. It's an educated guess. This is what a lot of scientists do, and that's what they're doing with the haplogroup theory. Go pull the papers. Most of them say hypothesize or guess or we think.
This takes us back. So you're saying if a person descends paternally from Jacob, they are definitely an Israelite, no matter what. This takes us back to the video clip we showed of your brother and you speaking on this a year ago. So let's consider this. If a descendant,
I'm not talking about E1B1A.
I'm not talking about E1B1A either. I don't know what Jacob's group is, but I'm saying if a descendant of Jacob had a son, a paternal descendant of Jacob, if a man who descended paternally from Jacob had a son with a European woman, and then their son had a son with a European woman, and that kept
We're
on
not hooked up on color. Yes,
you're going to get a situation where you have a person who's 95+%, 99% European, but now on your definition, that person is still an Israelite.
No. Hold on. At what point do you begin to become a descendant of that other group of people? I mean, when your DNA is 90% European and 1% Negro, at what point you're not a European?
So then,
you know what I'm saying?
Would you change your answer then?
No, I'm not changing my answer. I'm saying it's possible, but it's going to be based on some type of percentage of genetic match, right? I'm just saying autosomally, that person you're talking about is not going to match me autosomally, right? He's not. He might.
But then,
so
wouldn't
this is my point?
Wouldn't that mean then you can easily have a person who descends paternally from Jacob who's very different from you autosomally?
He will, if he's a descendant of Jacob. Look, we all should match autosomally. If I go and look at my grandfather's children, their grandchildren, and their children's children, I will tie back genetically to those people.
But they may not look like you, though.
They guaranteed they may not look like me, and some of them will marry other races, but you will find that genetic match. You will find, hey, back in we can tell Abu that 100 years ago you were related to this group of people. They can still do that, right? With autosomal, you can't do that with haplogroup. This is why I'm saying they're just wasting their time with haplogroup. And if you look at the papers, it's hypothesis. This is theoretical science. Haplogroup. Look, the only reason haplogroup is being pushed is by the companies like 23andMe, Ancestry.com. They push it like it's something. But when you look at the scientific papers, they don't talk like that.
Well, what I would say is the reason why there's a focus on haplogroups is because they can help you consider paternal lines across millennia. But I want to get back to this point about definitions of Israelite. So just to be clear, if a person descends from Jacob paternally, just on their strict paternal line, but on their other lines of descent, their father and their father's father and their father's father, they kept on marrying European women, so they're 95%, let's say, European. If they descend paternally from Jacob, are they an Israelite on your view?
Do you understand what you're saying? You're saying that, hold on, in every case, it's a male marrying a European female. So precisely. In that case, they're carrying Jacob's line every single generation. So you're not losing it. It's not being diluted. It is the maternal that's being diluted, not the paternal. So in your scenario, you have no loss. You always get 50% of the father, right? With the birth of a child, you get 50% of your mother and you get 50% of your father. So if your father is always a male coming from Jacob, you always have 50% of Jacob. You're not going to lose it.
No, I think that's not the case. Because look, if you have a person, let's say we have an Israelite and a non-Israelite, right? If male, non-Israelite female. The child will be 50% of one thing and then 50% of that non-Israelite population. Their next son, if the son of that son who's 50% non-Israelite, from this non-Israelite population,
another quarter.
Yeah, if they go on to have another son with a woman from that population, what you're going to get is a situation where they're 25% indicative of their grandfather and 75% indicative of the population that their mother and grandmother came from. And then if you go again, another son, you get a situation where it's somewhere around 12%. That's why within 7 generations, if a certain person who's not from a population, if their male line keeps marrying into a population that they're not from, within 7 generations, they're going to produce a son that's like 99% indicative of that population.
Well, I mean, your scenario is, look, go ahead and Google what genes a child of their parents get. It's always 50% of the father, 50% of the mother, right?
But he's saying about 3 generations. But by the time
it doesn't matter. He might start looking more white because of his mother's side. but he's always getting 50% of his father. Now,
you're saying that
Abu is saying that
50% of 50% is 25%.
Abu is saying that he can be bred out. Abu is saying he might get bred out, and maybe that.
Hold on, Abu.
Well, that's your scenario. Your scenario. You're saying at some point he keeps diluting, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm like, okay, at what point does he receive some other DNA other than his father? Because your scenario is he's always a descendant of Jacob.
Yes, he would still be a descendant of Jacob, and therefore those who actually hold, and I'm not saying you have to hold to a paternal definition of Israelite, but on a paternal definition of Israelite, he would still be an Israelite even if he's 99%. His autosomal DNA is
would never be 99% European.
And let me say why, though, because you're talking about you're always 50% of what your father is. But the thing is, if your father is only 50% indicative of a population, then you're going to be half of that. 50% of 50% is 25%. And then when you go another generation, 50% of 25% is going to be somewhere between 12 and 13%. And then from there, it's going to drop to somewhere 6 or 7%, then 3%. You know? That's why in second generations, it's 99% indicative of another population.
The son gets part of his mom's X chromosome, right, and part of his father's mom's X chromosome. So you have that dilution, that breakdown, that 25%, like you were saying. But when it comes to the father's DNA, under your scenario, it has always been a descendant of Jacob's son. So you're not getting that 25%.
So Tayu, you saying, you see the screen? He said, so you could dilute color. The color could change. They can look almost European, but the DNA isn't changing?
You have albino Negroes 100% African, and they 100% white. They got blonde hair. Their DNA is 100% African, matching their tribe, right? So skin color is not the issue.
So it ain't no skin doctor whatsoever.
No, this is just who is the look, Berean. Do you have children?
Yes.
Okay, your children. Do you expect your children not to look like you?
No.
Simple as that. Let's say Berean is Jacob. Berean had a son. His son had a son. Down the line, his DNA will always match back to Berean. Period.
This is, by the way, this is what I would say. What's changing, the paternal line is going to remain the same. That Y haplogroup, unless there's a mutation, that's going to remain the same. What's changing is the autosomal DNA. So yeah, you'll be 50% of what your father is, but you're only 25% of what your grandfather was, and you're only 12 or so % of what your great-grandfather was. And that's why autosomal DNA does not tell us about paternal descent on the scale of millennia, because even within 7 generations, you get a situation where a person can come from a paternal line, but is 99% indicative of another.
I tend to disagree with you on that, but I would say, let's if we can get a geneticist on here, that would be helpful. What's up, brother 49?
Well, a geneticist will tell you exactly what Abu just reiterated to you. He's absolutely correct.
Pull the paper then.
Pull the paper.
I can easily do that. But anyway, why DNA does not change over time, only through accumulation, right? So the basal haplogroup, it will not change. So if you're haplogroup E and you have a child, he's going to inherit that Y chromosome that's haplogroup E. If he adds a mutation to it, like E1B1 as a mutation becomes E1B1A or E1B1B coming from EP2. That will not change.
Nah, brother, haplogroup is faulty science. You guys misuse it. The papers clearly say it's a theoretical science.
It's not theoretical
and
at
you all talking about it don't change. Wait, hold on, let me ask this. So let me ask you, 49er.
Well, you gotta let me finish.
Hold on. Okay, and let me get this question. I'll let you have the floor.
Off.
If Isaac is E1B1A, what's Jacob and Esau, and what's their descendants?
I don't teach that Isaac was E1B1A, but if they were hypothetically E1B1A, their children would all be E1B1A. You can only go downstream. You can't go upstream. That's a scientific fact. If you knew anything about genetics, you would know that.
Man, I know about genetics. You don't. You up here using this science saying that it don't change. But when I give you a scenario where Isaac it doesn't matter if Isaac is E1B1A. Hold on. The theory applies. Okay. In your scenario, E1B1A, let's say is Isaac. In that case, why don't change? Jacob and Esau are the same. Jacob and Esau's children are the same.
Yes, they will all be down in that scenario that you just created. They will all be downstream mutations of E1B1A.
But guess what you guys never talk about? You guys never talk about mutation.
Well, you have to
mutation can happen at any time. See, you guys make assumptions.
No, that's
mutations
not an
can change. Mutations can happen in any generation.
Let me help you out because you're just trying to overtalk instead of having.
No, I don't need your help. Yes or no?
You need
yes
help
or no? Yes or no? Can mutations happen in any generation?
A mutation will happen, but it will only cause a downstream of E1B1A.
No, yes or no?
E1B1A1.
Okay, so is Jacob E1B1A and is Esau E1B1B?
Let me explain. You don't want the people to hear it. E1B1A will not create an R marker. That will not happen. That's a different accumulation that comes from a different basal haplogroup or paragroup. That's a scientific
All right.
fact.
No, you are 100% wrong. I'll tell you why. Because throughout this genetic, throughout this genetic,
you said you were 100%
throughout this genetic research history, what has happened was their mutations will get to a point where they say E1B1A, E1B1B, E1B1C, E1B1CA, and it got too long. And because it got too long, they said no longer E, let's make it D. That's how it works. So you're wrong. So that's faulty. See,
no, that's not how.
That's exactly what happens.
Since you cut me off, I must interject here. That's not how it works. E does not transform the D.
When the mutation
that is not how it works.
Hold on, yes it does.
Let him finish it. Then you can explain how it works. How he got it wrong.
Continues down that line. They choose another representation. The mutation no longer goes down the E line. It becomes D because of the various mutations down that line. That's just how it works. You're wrong.
All right, tell him why. Go ahead.
Absolutely not. E does not become D. E in D comes from the paragroup DE. E does not progress into D. That's false. You can't pull a scientific paper. You cannot give me a phylogenetic tree. All you gotta do is hold on, stop, bro. All you gotta do is pull up a phylogenetic tree showing the progression of E and D. They come from DE. Okay.
No, how do we know they're related? How do
we know they're related? How do we know they're related? Through the mutation accumulation. When you're E1B1A or EU290 like I am, the U290 is the terminal SNP. That's a mutation. So everyone that has the U290 shares a paternal ancestor.
No, all you're talking about, all you're talking about is
opening your mic.
All you're talking about
is you don't know what you're talking about.
All you're talking about is the designation assigned to those markers. All you're talking about is the designation assigned to those markers by the experts. You are wrong.
How do they determine what
exactly how they make the decision? When the mutation happens and it gets too long, they assign a new letter. Do some homework.
No, you need to do some homework because how they determine haplogroups is through the mutations.
Man,
if the mutations are similar, the only way to get mutations is to inherit it. How do you inherit it? Through sex, through your mother and father getting together. That's how they know that if you have this Y chromosome with the U290 SNP, then you descend from a common male ancestor that first it arose in. It's that simple.
No, look, Berean.
RM269 does not have U290. You do not. If you go do your DNA and do your SNPs, you're not going to have M81. That's
look, Berean, they're making assumptions based on what the
experts. You don't know what you're talking about.
Hold on.
No, you don't. Look, Berean, they make assumptions because what they're doing is they're making assumptions based on the stuff they find on Wikipedia and maybe some other references. But this is the standard assignment based on the scientific experts. They have designated. They have designated these standards on how they're going to designate what marker is what. Do you think they created, D out of nowhere? D, what happened was E got too long. The mutations happened. There were too many mutations. They decided let's designate this new area because the mutation was so significant. They say let's reassign it to a D. This is how we go down the letters.
Hold on a second. Come on, Orthodox Moor. What are your thoughts? You're hearing what's going on. Is he there or he walked away?
Nah, grace and peace, peace and blessings, family. So I want to get some clarity on a couple things because Salam, tell you what I'm saying. Like we talked about this. I interviewed you and your brother about this whole. Matter of fact, this exact topic. And so I would like to get some clarity if I could, because I'm a little bit confused, right? So when you're saying with what Abu's talking about, in terms of like let's say like Jacob was E1B1A, and you're saying Esau would be E1B1A. You're saying that's a problem, right? That's for Tayu, right? Yeah, you're saying that's a problem.
Could you repeat that?
You're saying like, so if like the Esau and Jacob having the same paternal haplogroup is a problem?
I'm not saying it's a problem. I'm saying the way they tend to talk about haplogroup mutations, genetically, you would when you think someone's Esau, when you think someone is Jacob, they could very well be Esau according to their argument. That's all I'm saying. And when I said, I'm sorry, when I said E to D, I didn't mean backwards. I meant E to F. So that's my mistake there.
Yeah, gotcha. No worries. So when you're talking about like that methodology could connect someone to Esau as well, on an autosomal level, wouldn't the same thing also be very possible, being the fact that Esau and Israel got the same paternal lineage, etc.?
Oh, absolutely.
So what would
that's why we say the curses is the key.
So if the same problem is presented with the autosomal concept, I'm trying to figure out what the issue is.
The issue is that mutations happen a lot more often in a human being, let's say, genetically, than what people are saying. So when they say, oh, Jacob is E1B1A, Jacob's you might be Jacob and you E1B1B.
Okay.
Right? You could still be Jacob.
What's wrong with that?
Well,
would you disagree more? Would you disagree with that?
No. So here's what I'm trying to figure. I'm trying to figure out what's the criteria if you're going to use the autosomal route. I'm trying to figure out what's the cutoff point for when someone's Israel. Like, so Abu was talking about someone who was 97% European, but would have like a Jacob's paternal line, right? And so the original argument was like, well, they wouldn't be Israelite because they don't look like one. It's like a phenotype argument, right? Hold on, let me finish what I'm saying. Like, you can correct me when I'm done. No issue. That's what it was sounding like, right? And so what I'm trying to figure out is, you were saying like, no, it's an autosomal connection. I'm like, all right, cool. So how much autosomal DNA mixed with an Israelite? How much do you have to not be an Israelite?
Right. I can't make that determination on what percentage is going to be an Israelite. What I'm saying is that's why we don't even teach DNA. We don't. It's just that when we started teaching about it, because people were talking about only E1B1A is Israel, and we like, that doesn't work when you look at the data and when you look at the information. So we tried to educate people on why you might have an Israelite who's a R1B and an E1B1A, but their autosomals are almost identical. You know,
you believe it could fade out where you could lose that DNA and no longer be an Israelite?
Repeat that, Berean.
You believe that it could fade out and you could no longer be an Israelite if you started off as one through mixing?
I mean, you can definitely become a European, like in Abu's scenario. At what point are you still an Israelite if for the last 7 generations you've been European? Right.
Can I chime in?
This is why we say we don't even teach DNA. We don't believe in it. People were asking for answers, and we were showing why it was faulty. This is why we say the curses are the key. The curses in Deuteronomy 28.
And you've been saying that from the gate. You've been saying that
from the very beginning. Yes.
And those videos that you had with DNA, you're just attempting to answer people. It's not like you promoting all of this stuff.
We're not promoting DNA at all. We were just showing why haplogroup is faulty and why autosomal. If you were going to try to do it scientifically, then autosomal makes sense. But we don't promote either one. We were just showing, look, 22 chromosomal matches versus 1. You see,
Gotcha.
that's not rocket science.
If I may, on that last part right there, 22 chromosomes, we have to break that down and put it in perspective, not going off the number. This is not a greater than contest. The Y chromosome shows you your paternal patrilineal descent. So if you're making an argument for who is a descendant of Jacob, then you would have to go off of the patrilineal, and the patrilineal will have to be consistent. The patrilineal is not going to make E to F. It's not going to be A to G. It's not going to jump all over the place. Patrilineal, if you have that Y chromosome, you got it from a male. He got it from a male. Berean, your father's Y chromosome is your Y chromosome. Your grandfather's chromosome is yours, so on and so forth. How Y chromosomes transmitted through sex, through reproduction and copulation. That's how you determine a paternal line. That's how you do it. You don't determine it through autosomal DNA. Autosomal DNA gives you the history or the snapshot or the biological snapshot of who your ancestors admix with. This is why when you get an autosomal DNA estimate, you will see Asian ancestry. You will see Pacific Islander ancestry. Does that mean you directly descend from a Pacific Islander that existed 500 years ago? No. But someone in your line admix with those peoples. That's all it's telling you. Y DNA and your X chromosome tell you who you descend from directly. It's a direct line.
Okay, yeah. The 23andMe, Ancestry.com, those people have experts who determine what category to place you. It is a manual decision. They look at the computerized generated results, but they are the ultimate ones that decide whether or not they're gonna put you in bucket A or bucket B. Okay, and not only that, some people, and I'm sure there may be some listening, who have gotten multiple haplogroup results. I know one guy got an A, he got an E, and one other. He got 3 different haplogroup results. Now we can obviously say something was wrong there, right? So once again, some of you guys who think you E probably might have been an error right there, right? But as I said, the experts ultimately decide what box they're going to put you in. It's not that you 100% match every time. They decide if what they see warrants you going in a specific bucket.
Well, my response to that would be this. First of all, with Y haplogroup assignment and X haplogroup assignment, they're not pulling the numbers or pulling the names out of thin air. They're basing it off of the SNPs and STRs. So if you have the same SNPs and STRs as somebody, again, how do you inherit DNA? Through sex. So that means a line of descent or common ancestry. If you and I share the same terminal SNP U290, that means you and I share a paternal ancestor that had U290, that SNP or mutation. That's how they do it. Now, autosomal DNA has a 76% accuracy rate. Y chromosome, X chromosome, that's 99.9%. You're not going to get more accurate than that because we can determine who you come from by the mutation accumulation, not just mutation, accumulation. Meaning, look at it like this. You have a stack of red Legos. That's haplogroup E. You add a orange Lego on top of it. Now, that's the mutation at the end of it. That would be my mutation, U290. Now, anything with that stack of red Legos descend from the same basal group, which is what we call a haplogroup E. There's accumulation and mutations that you have that are similar to other people groups, and that shows who you descend from. So when we get to the biblical argument and you say, hey, let's go off prophecy. Let's go off the people that went through the slave trade. The slave trade is a variegated group. There's many people that went through the slave trade that are not directly descended from a common ancestral pool. For example, the Chadic people, RV88. We have some people to this day, African Americans, that come from RV88. We do not descend from the same ancestors as them. So to say just simply because they went through a slave trade or they follow your interpretation of the curses does not mean they share common ancestry. I say this all the time. Common experience does not equal common ancestry.
Well, your assumption is that the Chads are not descendants of one of Jacob's sons. See, that's the mistake. You can't prove it. You made an assumption, and in reality, the Chads, who have been in Africa for thousands of years and just happen to have a different haplogroup, still may be a descendant of one of Jacob's sons. You guys make the faulty assumption, and you can't back it up. And that, as I said, go pull up. Let's go find a scientific paper, and I guarantee you, you're going to see hypothesis, theory, and that's going to be the terminology. You guys have taken this like a religion, and your science has become your religion, and this is not how you're supposed to approach it.
All right, if I may retort to that point there, saying if haplogroup R, V88, is definitely Jacob, and you posit that would mean every descendant of haplogroup R would be related to that. Okay, RM269 would also be one. R1B would also be. These are Western Europeans. What you just effectively did was make all of Western Europe. Hold on. What you just did with that assertion, saying that could be a son of Jacob. I'm going off your logic. You just made of all Western Europe Israelites, a majority of Western Europe Israelites, because the most common haplogroup amongst them are R1B.
Boo, explain to him his position. Did you walk away? Boo, you walked away from the his microphone might be acting.
No, I'm sorry. I'm here. I missed it. I'm sorry. What happened?
Well, I'll give him a refresher. So he painted a scenario about I made mention about the Chadics being victims of the slave trade, which proves that there's a variegation amongst slaves, meaning all slaves don't share a common ancestor, right? Therefore, we all can't be Israelites. Then he retorted with, well, how do we know haplogroup R is in Jacob? Well, if we're going to use haplogroup R as Jacob, then you effectively made all of Western Europe, or majority of Western Europe, Israelites. Because
I said one of Jacob's 12 sons.
Well, you made all of Western Europe one of Jacob's 12 sons.
Well, that could be the case, but that's my point. You can't go by one mutation on a single chromosome. You guys have made it a religion, and I'm telling you that if you read the scientific papers, they talk in theory. They say hypothesis, theorize,
think, according to the evidence.
This is the language. This is why I'm trying to show you that you guys are treating this like some God-given science that is without error. And this is not true. Go read the papers. They don't talk like that.
Well, I have a channel where all I do is read scientific papers, scientific literature, and books.
Pull one up.
Let's say this. I don't believe there's a single scientific paper entertaining the idea that there was a man in the Bronze Age whose patrilineal descendants some of them have haplogroup E, some of them haplogroup G, and some of them haplogroup R. I don't believe there's a single scientific paper entertaining that idea.
No, not from the Bible.
The idea that Tayu is proposing.
No, what I am proposing is that that the mutations get reassigned. Are you telling me that this is not how the numbers get assigned? They find a large mutation, like let's say they find a mutation of E, and they find something in that category, and at some point they say, hey, this mutation is so significant that we're going to reclassify it as D. This is what they do. So you can't say D wasn't related to E. This is how they reclassify. You guys aren't digging deep enough.
So real quick, are you saying they reclassified downstream or upstream?
Downstream. Like I said, I said E to F. If I said E to D, I was in error. I meant E to F.
F is not downstream of E.
E, F, G, H, I, J, K. Period.
Tayo,
I'm telling you, this is a major.
No.
A major.
Can I just bring this out? This data point. F comes from CF, not E. F comes from CF. So F is the downstream mutation from FM89 is a downstream mutation of CF. E comes from a separate branch, which comes from DE, which comes from the hypothetical ancestor CT.
What I'm saying is the reassignment does happen. Now, I haven't studied FG and all that. I'm saying this is how the reassignment occurs. That's the point I was making.
But are you saying like the letters, like G would be downstream from E because it's farther down in the alphabet?
What I was saying, it was getting reassigned, right? I'm saying at some point they reassigned. So what he was saying was, you know, they're not related, but at some point you don't know when the mutations occurred, how often the mutations occurred. Let's say Naphtali, for example. Naphtali had a mutation, just a simple, but his sons, a couple of generations down the road, one of his sons had a mutation. Now you can find that they reclassified it and he still may be related. This is why I'm saying haplogroup is not really where you should tie yourself to, because if you, like I said, pull the papers up, the language almost 90% of the time will talk in the language of hypothesis and theory.
Are you saying it's possible that I might have a downstream mutation that would make me not related to my parental lineage? Like my father's father, like, so are you saying it's possible that I might have a downstream mutation that would make it to where I'm not related to my father's 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 father?
No, I didn't say that. I'm saying there could be a mutation on the Y chromosome where, let's say, you know, Abraham was one haplogroup type, just for a simple example. Isaac was another haplogroup type, and Jacob was another haplogroup type. Your dad had a mutation. Now yours doesn't match Jacob's, but you're still a descendant of Jacob. Theoretically, that can occur, right?
When you're saying haplogroup type, are you saying they each have, like, one is A, one is B, one is C? Are you saying that all?
I'm not dealing with. I'm not talking about a specific classification. I'm saying over hundreds of years, you still could be related to Abraham, but it doesn't match it. Let's assume we had Abraham's haplogroup type, right? If we had Abraham's haplogroup type, and 1,000 years later, you're a descendant of Abraham, but there was a mutation. Right. Your haplogroup would no longer match Abraham, but that doesn't mean you're not Abraham's descendant.
When you say it wouldn't match, help me understand what you're saying. So for instance, like, so Dante is EM84, right? Which is a derivative of EM34, right? Which is a derivative of EM35, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So when you're saying it wouldn't match, are you saying like he wouldn't be EM35 or he wouldn't be E?
I'm saying what you would get reclassified over time based on the significance of the mutation. They would reclassify you. This is why now you see UM34, things like that, where 5-10 years ago it was E1B1A, but now what is it? EM32? It's a reclassification. They reapply numbers and they reallocate these groups so they can discuss them better. So they give them these markers new identifications.
I never seen that in the papers when they do what you call reclassification. It does not change what that haplogroup is. For instance, like you brought up E1B1A.
I didn't say it changes the haplogroup. I'm saying that a mutation is a new classification.
Got you. But a Y chromosome, it consists of a multitude of mutations. That's what we look at, the similarity between mutations. So when it doesn't have the same amount of mutations or the same type of mutations, then they're not your relative. They can be distantly related, but not directly. Now, the state with the reclassification, E1B1A being called EM2, it's still the same SNP, still the same marker.
Well,
that didn't change.
I'm saying that one just got reclassified, but it's the same one. I'm saying there was no mutation for what is it, EM32, right? There was no in that example. There was no mutation. I'm saying when mutations occur, they do get assigned a different marker, a different type, haplotype.
Well, I can exemplify that instead of just saying. I can exemplify it again. EV38. What does it produce? EM2. EM2 is the last mutation that it gained. Right?
They will reassign. Look, when the mutation is significant enough, they will reassign a letter.
They won't reassign the letter.
Go look at some of the older papers, dude.
I read these papers. What are you talking
about? It don't matter. Go back and look at some of these older papers.
I gave
this
you
is how they started out. I mean, you could pull something up on the screen.
Well, yeah. I mean all you gotta do is go to isogg.org and
go
type
ahead.
in.
Pull it up for me.
Hold on real quick. I'm giving examples here because you're just making statements. I'm trying to exemplify my points. If you go there, you can see that E1B1A is being used. all it is the Y chromosome consortium. So they will change the name and say, okay, we're not going to use E1B1A anymore. We'll use EM2 or vice versa. That didn't change the SNPs or mutations.
Okay, Berean, hold on. I'm gonna find this letter I had from a guy from the SOG. If I can find it, give me a second.
You want to? All right. You want to share? You want to share your screen? Hold on, your brother. Hold on. All right. Yeah. I'm gonna drop the link in there right now. Go ahead. Go ahead, Orthodox Moor. Your position on the differences. What you seeing right here?
Well, I want to get some understanding from a scenario that happened to where, like, so I've interviewed Tayu and Yashub, and I've also interviewed Abu on this concept. And what came up in both interviews was this example that you showed earlier about this 97% European who had an E haplogroup, right? Yeah. And that there was an issue with that. And so I'm trying to understand how this works. And if I can, I'd like to use Abu as an example, right? Because Abu was talking about Abu came on my show and showed his DNA, et cetera, whatnot. And he ran his DNA through GEDmatch and through the Ethio helix at that, right? Which is the one that a lot of the urban apologists were telling Israelites they need to run their DNA through. And Abu came up higher in connected in Ethio helix and came up higher with Ethiopian Jew than almost everyone else that I've seen in the Israelite community, right? But Abu, yes, 100%. You can go check this out on my channel. I compared it to mine as well. I have me and Abu and I believe Tayu and Yashub also said that they actually show up as Ethio helix or Ethiopian Jew and Ethio helix. Not very many people in the Israelite community do. We show up, most of us show up as Ethiopian Jew, like the MDLP, etc. But in Ethio helix, Abu showed up very, very high. And so he shows up higher than again, more than 99% of the people I check out whose DNA who's in the Israelite community, right?
Hold on a minute. Tayu Ministries extended. It's I put it in the comment section. I put it in there 2 times. Go ahead, Moor. So
in the example that you played earlier with that 97% European with the E haplogroup, they were saying it's problematic that he's European. You can't say that he's African or that he has the E haplogroup, et cetera, right? Or that he connects to the E, he connects more to the European. Like, so in Abu's situation, he connects more to the Ethiopian DNA than almost all of us do in terms of the autosomal concept through GEDmatch, right? Yet he's phenotypically not East African, right? And he's genetically mostly not East African. He's like mostly North African, et cetera. So
I would expect that from Abu. I mean, we don't teach phenotype being the key. What we're saying is autosomally, that person that was 97% white is at some point European, right? At some point. So, if you got a glass of water and you put a drop of Coke, that don't make the water Coke. All right.
That's a false equivocation, because that's not how DNA works, because the identity of the Coca-Cola would be the Y chromosome.
I mean, that's what I'm telling you. It's faulty. You guys have made haplogroup a religion, and it shouldn't be, because it's a theoretical science. It is not hardcore facts. You guys have made it a religion.
Got you. You're saying it's not hardcore facts, but you and I, if you're a male, you got sperm, and within that sperm, you have Y chromosomes, right? And within those Y chromosomes, once you examine them, you see the SNPs and mutations, right? And the only way to inherit a Y chromosome is from your father. There's no other way of doing it. You can't do it from injection from an alien or something weird stuff like that.
And as I pointed out, it is also dependent.
That's a concrete fact.
As I pointed out, it is also dependent on the company that's testing your mutation and assigning your haplogroup. It is dependent on them making that call.
Well, you're making it seem as if they're just writing numbers on a paper and saying, "Hey, here you go, it's a lottery." No, it's not.
I read.
There's a strict, concrete science behind it.
No, the science is theoretical, though. Okay,
the science
and what I'm saying, yes, it is. See, it's a religion. I read papers. I read where they clearly
taking it too far.
I read where
that isn't taking it too far. We're not just looking at examining your Y chromosome. You can tell. That's why they call them uniparental markers.
So here you go, Berean.
Because you can reconstruct your parental line on either the Y or X chromosome.
So here you go, Berean. E1B1A is their God haplogroup. Now let's take that haplogroup and match it to the Chad people, like he said, are aura. Now let's take that autosomal and put it together and see the relationship. You're going to have matches. Now, theoretically, the way they present it, if you're E1B1A, your autosomal should reaffirm that. And anyone that's not E1B1A, their autosomal should not match, because autosomal, as I pointed out, can convict you in the line of in a court case, but haplogroup cannot. Why? Because the 22 chromosomal pairs actually determines your family connection.
Do me a favor, read the screen.
Who, me?
Yes, please.
If haplogroup letters don't ever change, why isn't everyone on the planet have the same haplogroup? When did each letter come about and how? Excellent question, Dante, because theoretically we all should have the same haplogroup according to them. Adam, we all should have Adam's DNA according to them.
Wow. All right.
We do show a common humanity. We do share a common humanity. And we call that Y chromosome on Adam. I teach that that's Y chromosome on Noah. No one's disregarding that. But over time, these humans or groups of humans diversified. And that's what haplogroups show you. So we are all related. But when we're talking about direct relationships through uniparental markers to show what father we come from, because that's what we're asking for. The ultimate question here is who descends from Jacob. The science that does that is analyzing your Y chromosome, because it's from an unbroken chain from father to father.
It's an unbroken chain from father to father. Then we all should be Adam.
Yes, we are. I just said
okay.
that.
Then we shouldn't see a change. We shouldn't. We should have the same haplogroup.
We say the same. No, that isn't. Did you hear what I just said?
I see what you
listen.
Let me address my point.
We would all have I'm trying to respond to what you just said. We will all have that basal node or trunk that we all come from, but these different humans and different groups will mutate over time, and through mutated accumulations will differentiate. And that's what the Bible teaches you, that all people groups come from Noah through three people.
Does that rule not apply to Jacob as well?
Jacob will produce.
Your argument should apply to Jacob as well.
Well, hold on. Listen, it will produce it, but only a downstream of whatever that mutation is. Anybody in this room, you're not going to produce anything other than what you have. You can only add to that. Therefore, you're still going to be haplogroup E. You're still going to be haplogroup. Your children are going to be haplogroup E if you're haplogroup E. And I believe you're haplogroup G. Your children will be haplogroup G. There's nothing you can do to change that.
Who makes the classification of the marker assignments? Who applies the letters? And under what criteria do they apply the letters?
I've already explained that. The geneticists that examine the genomic data, they do.
Who and specifically?
They do it do you want the answer? I already said this earlier. Through the SNPs and STRs. All right, which are your mutations.
I didn't ask how.
You just said how do they do it?
I said who.
And who does it?
I didn't say how. I said what. When I said how, I said what method do they use?
Do the scientists use?
Yeah, do the scientists use to reclassify that marker mutation? What's the method, and who's the group of people that do it, and under what criteria will they make that assignment? So, like, brother Orthodox Moor might have a mutation compared to his dad when he has children. So his child may have that new mutation. At what point does that get reclassified? You see what I'm saying?
Well, it depends on who's head of the consortium. So you have right now ISOGG. You had a group before them, and they would do what you're talking about, the nomenclature, but the nomenclature doesn't change. If tomorrow we decide, the nomenclature changed, but the subject doesn't, right? So if tomorrow we decide we're not going to name air, it doesn't mean the properties of air change. And that's what you're trying to say with DNA. Just because someone changed the name or change it means that, it's no longer related. No, we still have the same type of mutations, no matter what you try to call it.
But your argument falls because you already said Adam is our relative, just like Jacob is our relative. At what point am I not related to Adam? At what point am I not related to Jacob?
I never said it wasn't related.
What I'm saying is based on the mutation over time, but you don't know when that mutation occurred. You don't know what generation You don't know. No, you don't. What are you gonna say? 50 million years ago, like they do?
They don't say 50 million.
Well, you know what I mean. 100,000,
A long time
50,000
ago,
years
yeah.
ago.
Yeah,
That's how they talk.
I'm a proponent. I
are
don't
you a
see a
proponent
problem
of
with
that?
that. I'm a proponent of. I don't believe the Earth 6,000 years.
No, you think mankind been on the Earth 50,000 years?
That's what the evidence shows you.
Okay. Well, I don't believe that.
If you take the time off the table, though, right? It doesn't. You can take the time completely off the table, right? How you know people are different is based upon the fact that they have different mutations. You're not going to find so.
But the frequency of the
hold on, real quick. You've been building for a hot second, right? So Dante's on the screen talking about. Let's assume Adam was A. How did B, C, D, E, etc. arise? When did those get renamed Adam's A from Adam's A, etc. Right? So what are they getting named based upon is a great question, right? And so again, like, so what makes somebody different? Like, so somebody who's A and somebody who's C and somebody who's D and E, they have different mutations. They don't have the same mutations. Take time off the table. So what do you do with the mutations then? How do you determine how people are related? Right? Hold on. You go through, you connect them by the mutations, correct?
Yes. So, like, we know that we're not related to people that come from FM89 lineages, which is like 90% of the Earth outside of Africa. It's because we don't have M89 in our SNPs. So if you examine your Y chromosome, Orthodox Moor, you're not going to have the M89 mutation, meaning you don't descend from a person that lived prior to you that had the M89 mutation. That's how they determine that. You understand? I descend from a male that had the EV38 mutations, the same mutation of Ramesses the third, I believe. So we share an ancestor.
Are you not applying the same rule to Jacob as you did to Adam? If we all descendants of Adam, I mean, so Orthodox Moor say take the time off the thing. Okay, let's take the time out. What I'm saying is now you don't know the frequency of mutations. The mutations are a lot more, occurs a lot more often than what is being stated. And it's not 50,000 years. It's not 100,000 years. I don't believe that. Mutations, and you can find some documents that tell you mutations happen all the time. The thing is that the official genome group that assigns these haplogroups, they have decided that whatever they determine, it has to be 10,000 years or more, something like that, before they classify a mutation. So Orthodox Moor could have a mutation in him right now, but they will not classify it because it's not old enough.
Second Exodus.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm going to make this very clear because I don't want to talk over people's heads. When they talk about haplogroups, it tends to lose people's attention. When in Israel, they discovered some skeletons in the cave in Watuf, right? It's called Natuf. The cave is called Natuf. Natuf is in the Judean mountains. They said that these people, when they took the DNA, belonged to haplogroup E. They are the originators of haplogroup E. They also said that these people are Semitic. These people had a migration down into Northeast Africa between the region of Egypt and Sudan. This, around 500 BC, a split between E happened. It became E1B1B and E1B1A. Remember that this came from Israel, and the scientists said that this was Semitic. These are Semitic people. One other fact, Ishmael is a descendant of Abraham, right?
Mm-hmm.
The prophet Muhammad came from an Arab tribe from Mecca. They traced the DNA of these people that the prophet Muhammad come from, and that haplogroup is E1B1B. When they migrated out of Arabia during the Moorish conquest, the spread of Islam, the Moors went all across North Africa and Southern Europe and parts of the Middle East, all the way to India and China. Then haplogroup J, which belonged to Caucasians, pushed them back down and out of Arabia and out of the Middle East into North Africa and East Africa. So you see a high concentration of E1B1B, which belonged to the Moors, which belonged to the Arabs, and the Muslims who identify as Muslims. So there are two populations that you can say that are Semitic. Now, what is related to E1B1B? E1B1A. Another thing is there's a group, and I heard people talk about Esau. There's a group of people who do branch off of E1B1A. It was original, just like what Tayu was saying, they changed the names, but you don't change the names and become a completely different branch. You simply change the names, but you become a sub-branch of that branch, of the original. So the group that is located in Ethiopia, southern Ethiopia today, are called the Afar, and a heavy concentration of them have E1B1A2, but it's been reclassified as E1B1C. So that is and they're Muslims, and they typically have a tradition of wearing red, a lot of red on them. Am I saying they're Esau? No, I'm not saying that, but there is a connection between them being Ethiopians and them being related to us through E1B1A. Nobody is saying that if you are autosomally, if you have a lot of ancestry, Israelite ancestry, nobody is saying that you cannot be an Israelite. There was a lot of people who were in the mixed multitude, like Caleb. Caleb was a Kenizzite, son of Jephunneh. The Kenizzites were said to be Canaanitish Edomites. That's one group. Another person is Ruth. Now, she's a woman, so she's going to have her DNA coming from the maternal side. But she comes from the Moabites. So we know there's a lot of people who grafted into Israel from Egypt and Cush or Nubia, and they came up out of in a wave of migration from Northeast Africa back into the Middle East and parts of Arabia. So migration happens. Now, what they're saying is that if your dad is haplogroup E, you're not going to become, I don't care how many different women you mix with and what you look like, that E is going to stay the same. There might be some minor mutations that branch off of E, but it's branching off on the same letter. It's not branching off and becoming F, G, and H. It's branching off and it's still E. So if they're saying that you descend from Jacob and the Semitic people have haplogroup E, that's all they're saying. They're saying paternally you descend from, you have the common ancestor of Jacob. Your other ancestors can be 99.9% Jacob, but that 1%, which comes from your father's lineage, may not be Jacob. So nobody is trying to discredit anyone from being Israel. We're just saying that when you follow the science, then you can follow the paternal ancestry of your common ancestor. I think that's all they're saying. I don't know if that's clear enough for people to understand, but I can make it even clearer.
Do me a favor, read the screen.
To be an Israelite, you must be of Jacob. You can't be Ham or Shem. I disagree with that, somewhat. To be an ethnic Israelite, you have to be from Jacob, ethnically. But if you want to be grafted in like Caleb was a Kenizzite.
Oh, a proselyte, yeah.
Yes, he was a proselyte, okay. But he became a part and listed in the lineage of Judah. So he was a Judean from the tribe of Judah because of his grafting into Israel.
Okay.
He inherits the same thing as a native-born Israelite. So you can have a different haplogroup. You can have a different ancestor paternally and still be an Israelite through grafting in.
So how you work with scripture and prophecy with what you just said, and who fit the curses and all of this other stuff? If people are looking at DNA to identify themselves, how does it work with you?
I simply believe that those people who accepted the covenant, whether you're haplogroup R or haplogroup E or haplogroup I or J, if you accepted that covenant, if you were circumcised and grafted into Abraham, you have to keep the same law that the Israelites kept. And if you broke that, then you would have to suffer the same punishments that the ethnic Israelites suffered.
So DNA or not, you could be underneath those quote curses.
Absolutely.
And your DNA not show that you could descend from people of the region originally.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Anybody else before we get out of here? Slick, I know you didn't want nothing on DNA, right?
I thought so. We ain't going. You getting out of there?
Yeah, I'm gonna go here and come back on. Being that we spent so much time on this year, I'm gonna go out and then come back on in about a half an hour, an hour.
Okay.
All right. Anybody else before we get out of here?
I just want to encourage people that want to learn more about DNA. Come to my channel. We actually try to break it down. You got to get technical with it. There is no, let's get simple with it. No, you got to get technical. People have to understand what a mutation is, SNPs is, understand paternal inheritance. They have to understand these terms, understand what they mean and the functions of it so we can have this conversation. Because today...
You ain't say your channel.
Genesis 49ers.
Okay, no, I'm just saying for anybody here that didn't hear.
Yeah. So Genesis 49ers is the channel, and we break this down quite often. So if you guys want to learn more about it, I advise you to go there. I give resources, books, papers that you can go read yourselves and learn the material and methodology yourselves. Because tonight what we seen displayed was someone that did not read or study or show a working knowledge of how DNA transmission works. I'm gonna leave it at that. Shalom.
All right, shalom. Orthodox Moor, what's your channel? Tell them if you got any closing words.
Yeah, my closing words are this. So this is an intricate conversation. So for the family, I beg we slow it down on all sides. I think that if we have competing ideas and ideologies, we need to instead of just throw them at each other, we should compare and contrast and really walk through with each other. You know what I'm saying? So I would definitely like to talk to Tayu and Yakoba more about this and get more understanding of certain stuff. But I would like to say this about how the mutation concept works, just on a real basic level, right? Take the date off the table, take the who's labeling stuff, take the letters off the table. The reason why that there's different groups, period, is because, like, yes, we all come from Y chromosome Adam and mitochondrial Eve, but the reason why there's different groups, period, is because not everyone has the same mutations in terms of their Y haplogroup and mitochondrial DNA, right? So no matter how you label it, you're going to have to identify the difference in mutations some way, shape, or form. And those differences are what make the different groups. However you want to label it, however you want to do it, throw time out, throw who's doing it out, throw how they're labeling it out. That's all. That's nomenclature. Like my man said, that doesn't matter, right? What matters is that things are getting separated by their likeness and by their kind, right? By their type of mutation, because not all mutations are the same. But yeah.
All right. Well, you got what's your channel? Tell me your channel, because you got a few videos discussing that, right?
Yes, sir. You can go check out. My channel is Orthodox Moor. You can go check out me and Abu talking about this, and me and I hope my brother's talking about this, like Israelite intelligentsia, the Yahweh War Machine, etc. Shout out to everyone in the channel. Shout out to the panel. Shout out to the chat. Peace and love, fam.
All right, y'all. We're gonna come back. I'm gonna let Slick pick it up. We're gonna talk about those prophecies, and we're gonna talk about what happened with the pastors in that conference from yesterday. I'll be back on in about maybe 45 minutes, an hour. All right. God bless.
I like the way this feel, yeah. Let my soul cry, yeah. Minister, we gonna speak from the heart on this one. I'm performing lyrical funerals, no obituary. I killed your boy and brought him back to life. Pet cemetery. My anointing not based on attendance at a seminary. Scarlet witches, they attracted to the visionary. Everywhere I go, I bring the word with me, missionary. Soldier drafted in the war machine, military. Pay attention, what I'm saying to you, legendary. You got the demeanor of a front desk secretary. That mean you take the calls, but you don't make the calls. That's why you hate, cause ain't nothing fake about me at all. Now I dare you try to say that with a straight face. My delivery in tip-top great shape. I'm too advanced for you, light years, space age. No evolution for you cavemen, stone age. I'm a thoroughbred, rock solid. I came from the bottom to the top, rock climbing. I grew up in the hood, pros and cons. That's that full court pressure when the ambulance roll out the stretch. Why can't you see it's not logical? If you live diabolical. Boy, your point of view smaller than hair follicle molecule. This for all of them that fall All of you smoking, all of them barbecue. When I pull up, your voice don't correct itself with no auto-tune. I got a whole nother level that I can enter whenever I gotta deal with the devil. I pick a whole nother method. I hear a whole lot of yapping. They wanna see my reaction. I'm really out here in the community making it happen. I don't really think they understand the dilemma. They ain't looking at the man in the mirror. Can't say it in the clearer. The plan is very simple. It's time to start playing in the temple. Before somebody come and put the can on your temple. Reaching like a baby with his hand for the nipple. The Grand Reaper coming with his hand on the circle. Hit the van coming with a ram with it. With the van coming get him. I am so glad that I changed up. Made it out of where I came from. Watch for the slide and the hook of the slow ball, fast ball, and that change up. That ghetto lifestyle, it changed us. Go back to visit, it ain't changed much. Only difference is now the way that my brain process information. And Satan, been after my license day one. Let me say something. Only reason that I'm still alive today because God's grace is amazing. Just another raisin in the sun. Dream deferred when things occurred. Now you getting served right on the curb like a lemonade stand. I just gave you the benediction, let the whole church say amen.